Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a quick review of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I really enjoyed this book, really liked it. I think when I was going into it, I really didn't know what to expect because I have watched the movie a million times. I love the movie with Tom Cruise and Dakota Fanning. I think it's so well done. But the book is set in a completely different time and it's a short book. It's only about 250 pages and I was really kind of anxious about how it was going to read and how it was going to feel being in a completely different period. But I really enjoyed it overall. I think it's a really solid sci-fi book. It really helped me get out of my little rut that I was finding myself in. I was reading a lot of fantasy, a lot of dark books as well. And so I needed something a little bit different and it definitely provided that. So what did I like? I really like Wells' writing style. I'm really excited to read more of his books. His prose flows beautifully. I never felt like I was taken out of the story. It was just masterfully done. And I think his writing style is very fluid. The pages flowed really nice and the story and the narrative flowed really nice. So if you're looking for something that just flows, this is the book for you. The other thing that I really liked, kind of connected to this, is the tone of the book. Wells is able to create this really beautiful sense of isolation. There's really not one moment where you don't feel isolated. Even when the main character that you're following is with other characters, you still feel this sense of dread. You still feel this sense of impending doom. And it's always there. Even at the end of the book where, it's kind of hopeful, there is still that sense of, well, what if they come back, He just does a really good job of just creating this really wonderful sense of wonder. But then coupling that with the dread and the tension and these kind of really big questions that face humanity, I think it really balances the narrative out, which I really liked. And I didn't really expect it, but I really liked it. The other thing that I think, we have to kind of shout out is the fact that the time that this book was written, it's really quite remarkable that he was able to develop such a forward-thinking idea in the 19th century. This book is set, I guess, kind of during the time of the Industrial Revolution, so modernity was really starting to settle in, or what we kind of considered modern was really starting to settle in. You can kind of see the dichotomy between the old ways and the new ways, and then you have these machines coming from space, and it's really interesting to see those kind of three different things playing against each other in a way. It's quite subtle, but you can definitely see it. The fact that he wrote this about 150 years ago, I could be wrong, so take it with a pinch of salt. And the fact that he was able to write something that has stood the test of time. I mean, when any sci-fi author does that, or any author does that, full stop, it always really impresses me. But I think it's hardest to do with sci-fi because I think sci-fi can get outdated very quickly. But in this book, it doesn't feel outdated. The descriptions of the machines, the way that they operate, the feeling of, this other thing, this, whatever it is, this robotic AI machine is just really cool. There's this kind of question of like, are these machines sentient beings? How do they operate? How are they different to humans? And it brings up a lot of philosophical questions, which brings on to my next point that I really enjoyed. And it is those kind of more metaphysical questions around the, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a machine? What does it mean to be sentient? What would it mean to cohabitate with these types of entities? It's really fascinating. I mean, I feel like today we live in a time where space is, all the rage. Every day we see new things on TV, in the news about the space race, who's going to be the first person or the first company to get to Mars. And there is this kind of side conversation of like, what if there is, other sentient beings that live on other planets? How would we as humans cohabitate with those types of individuals? I'm going off on a tangent, but it's really interesting. It's a really interesting quote. Whether you believe it or not, as a premise, it's really interesting what that could look like, right? Between humans and other beings. And by other beings, I mean other non-human, non-animal beings, right? So I really want to refrain using the alien word because I don't like that word. So I'm just going to say other sentient beings. The last thing that I really enjoyed is the historical context of this book. There are undertones of kind of British imperialism that comes through that I really liked. At the time, the British Empire was very much at its kind of peak or getting to its peak at that time. And I think there are undercurrents of how British imperialism was impacting the broader world. And I think that's reflected in the machines coming down and literally just invading England and not being particularly welcome and creating destruction and upending lives and destroying people's natural kind of habitats. And without getting kind of political, you know, it's really interesting to see it from the perspective of another kind of race, if that makes, of another non-human race. And I think Wells is essentially providing commentary on what was going on at the time. I don't know whether he agreed with it necessarily, or whether this is just him throwing the question out there. I don't actually know. If you do know the answer to that, please let me know. But I think this whole concept of the British Empire being the kind of kings of the earth, I think is really fascinating. And the fact that that was mirrored in the machines coming down, I think was really cool. I don't know if he intentionally was trying to make a jab at the British Empire, but he's making a jab at the British Empire, and I think it's done really well. The things that I didn't like about it, or you might struggle with it can get a little bit slow in places. That being said, because of his writing style, it does still flow very nicely. So it doesn't ever feel like you're out of the story, which is really important for me personally. But the pacing can slow down to an extreme, and then it really picks up, and then it slows down again. And it can feel a little bit, I don't know, not disjointed, because the whole point I just made was that it flows really well, which it does. But it can just feel a little bit of a lull. Sometimes I kind of want to always be on my toes. That's not necessarily Wells's fault. It's just more my personal preference. The other thing, and this is just me being really pedantic, and if you've read this book and you know way more about me than this book, please correct me. But I do feel like there are some maybe scientific inconsistencies in the book. One example is the fact that I think it was 10 cylinders landed, and 7 of those cylinders landed in England. When you think of the mass of the Earth, it doesn't really seem plausible that 7 out of 10 cylinders would land in England, given the vastness of the planet. I feel like that's me nitpicking for sure. If you don't think about it too hard, it is what it is. But for me, sci-fi has to feel plausible. I think the machines themselves and the way that they're portrayed, I think is done really well, and I think they're really realistically portrayed. But I do think some of the underlying science behind the machines arriving on Earth and the placement of the machines is a little bit iffy. And I am one of those people, I'm a detail person. I like thinking about the details, especially in sci-fi, right? I think that's where a lot of us sci-fi readers and fantasy readers get a lot of our kicks, is when you can tell that an author has put a lot of thought behind the underlying assumptions of that world. And I just feel like that was a pretty big one. Like 10 cylinders, are 7 of them really gonna land on this tiny little island? I don't know, I don't really buy that. It does say at the end of the book that there were other cylinders deployed in other countries. I think it mentions like Ireland, and then it mentions, I think maybe 1 or 2 others, but it doesn't add up. And I feel like the consequences of those machines coming to Earth should have felt vaster, but it didn't necessarily feel like that, because we were told at the end that only 7 out of 10 were actually deployed in England specifically. That's just a small gripe. I think overall, I really enjoyed the book. I ended up giving it a 3.75, borderline 4. I think it is more of a 3.75, but for me, solid sci-fi is really hard to find, and I do think this is a solid sci-fi book. I definitely want to read more of his stuff, because I really like the way that he writes, and I've heard that he gets better as a writer. There are some other books that I'm thinking of picking up that I think could satisfy that kind of crave when I need to read a sci-fi book that is, you know, short and digestible. Overall, the experience was really great. I really enjoyed the undertones of the book. I really enjoyed the sense of dread and isolation, the tone. As I mentioned, his writing style is just really beautiful, and I'm really excited to see how that translates in his other books. I'm gonna leave it there. I just wanted to give you a quick video on how I found this book. I think this is actually my first sci-fi review as well, because I don't tend to read as much sci-fi as I used to. I do read a lot more fantasy, and I've actually been reading a lot more kind of classics and I guess kind of contemporary fiction recently, which is kind of cool. I don't know why that's happened, but it's happened. So let me know if you've read this book. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, especially on maybe some of the more scientific aspects, and whether you agree, whether it's really that plausible. Let me know what you think. We'll take the conversation down below, and I'll see you in the next video, folks. Take care, stay safe, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.